Okay. One of the things in this section that we're trying to get good at is thinking of, like, for example, in this problem, if you noticed out front, they're multiplying by negative 1/12. That's the same thing as dividing by 12, isn't it? That's called number sense, when you get comfortable with writing things a bunch of different ways and thinking about them a bunch of different ways. So here, if you could think of it as dividing everything by 12 here because you're multiplying by 1/12. That doesn't really help me here because these numbers are small on the inside. If you notice what's going on here, it's still getting down to things like PEMDAS, isn't it? We got to decide what to do first. Am I going to add first, or am I going to, what am I going to do first here, you think? The parentheses, and there's nothing inside to put together. Here, let me put my variables. Let me outline them in red just because that is an S, but it looks kind of like a 5. And then this is an S, but it looks kind of like a 5. My variables are in red now, so at least I can tell those aren't numbers that could get squished together. There's really nothing that I can put together in the parentheses. There's no exponent, so I'm going to multiply or divide first. And I have several things to multiply because I have that I could multiply out, and then I have this part over here I could multiply out. Okay, so we had to distribute, right? When we see a number in front, that means we got to distribute it. So it's negative 1/12 times 6r. It's kind of nice that there's a 1 on the top here, because doesn't that mean if I'm multiplying by this negative 1/12 by 6r, that 6r is just going to be, it'd be negative 1 times 6r is 6r. And then if I want to think of this as a fraction, I could just say 12 times 1 is 12, couldn't I? I could turn them both into fractions if it helps me think about it. You don't have to do that, but sometimes it helps people. Now, you remember how if I'm going to have to multiply negative 1/12 times this 4s, and I could look at this plus as being a positive 4s. So I could say a negative 1/12 times a positive 4s, and if you have to, you could even come down on a line and write it like this if you needed to off to the side, and that might be where you go, oh, let me put that over 1. That would be negative 1 times 4s is a negative 4s, and 12 times 1 is 12. I could have reduced these before I multiplied them. Sometimes it's kind of hard to get it down and not mess it up if you reduce it when you're multiplying, like especially when you got lots of fractions like this and they're kind of, harder. So I'm going to reduce in a different step here, but you can feel free to reduce as you're doing it if you're able to do that. I don't want to make any mistakes, and I know I can do that really easily. Now I'm adding some stuff. I'm adding a positive 7 times all this stuff over here. So let's go do that. 7 times 1 over 21s. Again, you could come down here and say 7 times 1 over 21s, and I could put the 7 over 1 if I need to, but a lot of you can see that would just be 7 over 21. If you don't, you just go 7 times 1 is 7, and then there's on the bottom 1 times 21 is 21, and then s. And then when I go to do the other multiplying here, it's positive 7, or 7 over 1, whichever way you like to think of it, times a negative 1 over 14r. Let's do the sign first. I like to break things apart. What's a positive times a negative? And then it's going to be a negative, right? So maybe you break it up and do the signs first. Then you do the number parts. What's 7 times 1 over 14? Wouldn't that be 7 over 14? And we can see that's going to reduce. But then there's an r that needs to get put with it too. Let me ask you a question, just because I want to make sure y'all understand this. Is negative 7 over 14r, like this, the same thing as negative 7r over 14? No. They actually are, okay? Here's why. When I smush stuff together, isn't it just multiplied, right? And if you look right here, it's all smushed together, isn't it? Couldn't I say, oh, there's multiply there, and couldn't I take the r and put it over 1, and then say negative 7 times r is negative 7r, and 14 times 1 is 14? You actually can do that. You can either put the r out to the side, Or you can put it on top if you just want to do that. So we don't have to have these variables sitting off to the side here. As a matter of fact, do you notice that over here that I actually put them on top within the fraction? You see how I did that? That's kind of important to realize because when we get to doing equations of lines, a lot of people have a hard time picking something off called the slope because they don't know they can, either put it either way is fine. And when you get comfortable with that, that's good because it's going to help you when you look at equations later to be able to recognize what's going on with them. Okay, I have written all over this thing. Let's see if I can get rid of some of the stuff I did. Let's see if it will undo. No, it's not going to undo. Oh, yeah, it is, just very slowly. Oops, I don't want to get rid of that. That was something I needed, wasn't it? So I had minus 7r over 14. I'm going to go ahead and write that one that way just so you see you could do it, okay? Now, I got lots of stuff to reduce here, don't I? Each little fraction I could go reduce. What is 6 over 12 reduced to? 1 over 2. So I could write this as negative 1/2 r, or I could write it as negative r over 2. It's the same thing. And then I have a subtraction sign. What would the next fraction? That's a 4s over 12, even though it might look like a 5 to you. Yeah, 1/3. 4 goes into 4 once, 4 goes into 12 3, so that becomes a 1/3 s. I'm going to write it like that this time, just to show you. I could have done it either way. I could have written that as negative s over 3 if I wanted to. It's the same thing, okay? Let me get rid of that last thing I put there so I have some room to work. And then now I've got to this 7s over 21. There's a plus sign. So 7 goes into 7 once. It goes into 21 3 times. I could write that as 1/3 s, or I could write that as s over 3. I'm just going to go ahead and do that just to mess with you a little bit because it's going to help you to be able to do it either way. What about the last fraction? Then that's 7... Yeah, 7 goes into 14 twice. So that ends up being, I could write negative r over 2, or I could write negative 1/2 r. Either way, it's the same thing. Can I combine some like terms here? Or there's some things that are alike? There's s's and there's r's. So I can put the s's together and the r's together. Let's do the r's first. I have an r here and an r here. Now, here's where I might want to not write this as r over 2. If I'm trying to combine negative r over 2 and negative 1/2 r, wouldn't it be easier to think about if I actually had the 1 there? Negative 1/2 r plus another negative 1/2 r would be how many r's? Negative 1 r, right? Because it's like if you think about the number line, like if here's the number line, if you're sitting at 0 and you go negative 1/2 and then you go another negative 1/2, there you're down at negative 1, aren't you? So that's a negative 1 r, but the lazy math guy just usually writes it as negative r. He doesn't usually put that 1 in, does he? Okay, so we took care of those guys. Now I'm looking at my s's, and I forgot to write my s here, and I should have. I just kind of let it drop off the face of the earth, and then I'm like, where did it go? So I noticed it. If I have a negative 1/3 s, and I'm going to add s over 3 to it, that's kind of confusing, isn't it? So what if I put the 1 there, and I thought of this as negative 1/3 s plus a positive 1/3 s? Negative 1/3 of something plus a third of something. Wouldn't those cancel out and add up to 0? So it goes away, doesn't it? When we get done, all this adds up to negative r.